This is comments from a regular commenter who I like, Dizerner. They say you don't need a gospel if the law. So this is in comments regarding my video where I'm talking about law and grace to some degree. You don't need. So this is their response. You don't need a gospel if the law is done away with. He's quoting me. I'm pretty sure it's a he. That is like saying, if you are saved, then you don't need to be saved. Okay. The gospel is what brought that freedom. Not sure what freedom that's speaking of. So of course we will need it. You make the law only half of what it is, the punishment half. But the law has demands as well. The sins we still commit. Wow, this is so perfect. I love this comment. Because I think it demonstrates a really common misunderstanding. Not to be arrogant, I truly believe that. Let me share the comment so I can look over this, kind of think about this slowly. I love honest people because they're not afraid to say the right thing or wrong thing, and it's very helpful. Even if I'm wrong or they're wrong, it doesn't matter. Like, it's when people like muddy the waters. So I can appreciate this. I do think it's incorrect, and that I'm correct, and that I can demonstrate that. It's a consistency issue, or say it's a logical issue. Maybe you could say. I'm open though. So like I notice when I talk to different kind of evangelicals, I get the gamut of half in, half out. So here's where the problem comes in, I think. This dichotomy, this false dichotomy, first off, because this is really what the tension is. That everybody, because of mercy, everyone's going to have a different degree and a different taste for what they respond to, like, is a serious issue or not, okay? Because we are forgiven of doing wrong things, that God says, right? So how you interact, like, the back of everybody's mind is, oh, Jamie thinks you have to keep the Sabbath. No, I think you're obliged to keep the Sabbath, not for salvation. And that's where all these issues come up. It's like, oh, if somebody says you're supposed to keep the commandments, it means you're saved by your works. I'll remind you that prohibitions to evil aren't works. When you do what? Not doing evil is a work. The works of the law are the sacrificial system. So sin is defined by God's law. That's what I mean by the law. I don't mean the Mosaic covenant. I mean God's law, which was codified in the Mosaic law. And we still need God's provision that he provided them in the old covenant, and we still need it now in the world through Christ, once for all sacrifice. So if you break it up into like what God's providing in the covenants, he's providing the exact same thing, exactly what we need. And what he asks us to do, how much different is it going to be? Well, if it means bringing a sacrifice, then no, we don't do that because Jesus is our sacrifice. If it means going to the temple, well, no, there is no temple. If it means, and then you can go from there. But because otherwise you're saying, do you think God gave them a bad thing? You have to understand, you think Paul hated the law that God gave his people? He's a Jew. He's of the first covenant people, let's say. He's a son of Abraham. But let's see this comment now better, close up. More better. Okay, starting over here. You don't need a gospel. He's quoting me. You don't need a gospel if the law is done away with. Is what I mean by that is the gospel is the good news that we're saved from our sins and from death and hell, and that God freely provides mercy and justification through his Son. So the gospel is salvation. Salvation means salvage, save from something. God's not just saving us from himself. He's saving us from our sins. So if there is no law, then there's no sins. Law is God's commandments, which are a reflection of who he is and what we're supposed to be like if everything is going perfectly. Breaking those things is what separates us from God on like a technical, basic level, which is a result of faithlessness, not trusting God. He says, do this. We say, no, we'll do this. We have no faith. We won't obey. We go our own way. We do our own thing. It's not, you got to get this right, guys. What God says is good. How we twist it up doesn't make what God says bad. There's no love in breaking the commandments. You can't actually love someone. It's not just a feeling or like nice feelings towards somebody. If you really love them, you put them before yourself, or it's fake. Emotions are part of the game, but you can have all sorts of confused feelings about somebody. When you love them, you're committed. You will make sacrifice. And what that means is when you're doing that, you're not lying. You're not secretly coveting their things. You're not putting, you can't fool yourself when the commandments are there. They're not the fruits of the Spirit. They're the refraining things. They're the checklist in the sense that you can see if you're actually, if it's genuine feelings that you really care about someone. Look, I don't care if a guy has sex with his wife, and you know, is a good lover that in that sense, and then he beats her after that every night and says he loves her. It doesn't mean anything. It's false. You can't beat your wife and then actually love her. Okay, it doesn't work. That's not true. I don't care how well he pleases her physically, and I don't care how many times he says I love you and buys her chocolates. If you're beating her up, you don't love the woman. And it's the same thing here. Oh, you believe in Jesus? Okay. What does that mean? Oh, you said the words? You called people Pharisees because they want to keep God's, they want to be like Jesus? I'm not impressed. You think people, if you're, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. If you are saved, then you don't need to be saved. Right. The gospel is what brought that freedom. So of course we still need it. No, but you weren't even born yet. What, does Jesus apply the law individually, or is it a rule for mankind? And by the way, what is God going to judge the world by if the law is done away with by Jesus' death, like universally? You got a couple options. If you're a Calvinist and you want to go the hardcore, you can say, well, Jesus took the law out of the way for specific people, but not anybody else, so they're screwed. Or if you think Jesus died for everybody, then that means he knocked the law out. According to you, he's knocking the law out for everybody, and there's no sin. God didn't knock out the sin. So you got to understand, Jesus merited our salvation, which he imputes for justification. If his keeping of the law means he just wiped it out, and I'm not talking about the covenant. The new covenant is a new covenant. The question is, you can't wipe out God's character, which is what those reflect. They're like the eternal God's attributes of the God that does not sin, that he gives to us to bear his image fully and completely. Remember, there's no sin in heaven. Not because there's no law, God's law doesn't exist, because he's going to judge the world by the law. And it's going to condemn them because they did not believe. And so you do separate the penal. That's why under the law, it doesn't mean don't keep God's commandments, because it says it over and over and over. And Paul says, and that's what I'm going to go into. So sorry, I'm really passionate about this. But the law has demands as well. Yes. But you guys don't get that Jesus, the curse of the law is not keeping commandments. Or look, think of it as the 10 words that reflect the love of God. Don't think of it as, that dumb guy in whatever church you happen to have unfond feelings towards, where you heard them, pointing their finger and shaking their finger at you saying, don't do this, don't do that. That's like sociological things, like principles. Love demands that these things be true. Like, to knock these out of the way is for God to wipe out what it means to actually love someone. Sins are actually bad. It wasn't like God made up the sin thing and then he did away with it. So it's like, no, the forgiveness is like that God shows mercy towards us when we disobeyed and we're not showing love. For him to wipe that out, well, first of all, it's kind of like conceptually impossible because it's himself, his own character. Okay, that's what that reflects. I mean, read what the Jews talk about on this. Everybody understood this. So the sins we still commit and ask forgiveness for are not on the basis of law. I don't what. For the basis of law does not offer any forgiveness unless the atonement removes its demands. Well, right, that's what I'm saying. The curse of the law is a statement based on Deuteronomy 30, and it's in regards to the nature of the covenant made at Sinai. It was a conditional covenant that was dependent on the people's obedience. And my covenant they did break. And what did God say when they were out there? Several examples I'm going to give in a minute, hopefully, if I don't get called to work. But so look, it's not law or grace. It's God, the sovereign God, forever, and his mercy towards us while we were yet sinners. The way you guys, this is why Perry the Preacher exists, because you're arguing with me, and if you're right, then Perry the Preacher is right, conceptually. God did away with the law. No, he did away with the old covenant. There's a new covenant. Now tell me, do you think God's character changed because Jesus was a sacrifice? Did God? No. The thing that changed, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Regarding like the principles of what defines the moral or ethical demands of humanity, because God created us. He didn't make a mistake about his ethical demands. They're a reflection of his person. That's why we bear his image, and he gives us these commands. So, yes, you can't love somebody and break the commandments. If you look, like, I want to know, how do you love God? Well, you don't worship other gods. You don't worship idols, right? You don't take his name in vain. You don't put other gods before him, right? There's one positive thing you could do is honor that Jesus is the creator of the heavens and the earth and the week. And you can remember that he rested on the seventh day, and you can take that day off and rest in Jesus. That's an active thing you can do. But it's what's funny about that active thing is you actively rest. You don't do commerce. You don't work on that day because you're saying, hey, the 7-day week, I wonder where that came from. I'll tell you where it came from. Jesus Christ created that whole universe and humanity on the 6th day. And then the next day, he took a day off. And then he made that pattern for us. And here we are, 6,000 years later. All of the entire world has a 7-day week. And a large portion of them don't, even the Christians don't believe that. I wonder why. I wonder if they'd remembered the Sabbath day and the Lord of the Sabbath. I wonder if we'd be in the exact place we are now. Oh, I'm self-righteous? I'm sorry. Am I self-righteous? Sorry, I love Jesus. What can I say? And you guys are the works salvation is saying you got to work on the Sabbath. I just said take the day off, man. Jesus is king. Rest in Jesus. That's why I keep the Sabbath. So anyway, I want to go to Galatians. Hopefully I didn't scare you off there. You should keep the Sabbath. And if you don't, you're not as good as me. Do I think I'm better than you? No, of course not. I know I'm not better than you. I just think it'd go well with you if you did. I want you to have abundance and happiness and love and peace and rest, and not be burdened down with the shackles of sin. It's not a light burden if you think Jesus lets you just do whatever, it doesn't matter. No, he wants to save you from that. You're saved. Now go sin no more. I let you off the hook. Now go sin no more. He's not saying now sin isn't a thing. Because sin is the transgression of the law. Where there is no law, there is no sin. Anything done without faith is sin. That doesn't mean just slather faith on whatever you do and you're good. It doesn't mean you can break the law and it's not sin anymore because you put a thin slice of faith on your sin. No. It's saying when you walk in the Spirit, and there's some nuance here, but I would say it means, is my opinion, and I think it makes sense. You're not walking by faith when you're sinning against God's law. And then there's nuances there, right? Like if someone's in ignorance, there's some, you know, people are judged by the light that they have, things like that, right? Or like you could have a really good intention and just mess up, and that's probably less guilty of that. For that, I mean, than someone who would know better, and God's the judge of all that. You know, I'm not saying I am, just saying like that makes sense to me. I think there seems to be that sort of principle taught in the Bible regarding how things work, but people can have different opinions on that. I mean, they're going to anyway. So now I'm going to go to Galatians because this is really interesting how Galatians works. Because this is the go-to by everybody who wants to say there's just no law. There's just no law at all. Thanks for your comments, Discern. I would just say sin can still exist without the law. I don't think so. Dead to the law does not mean the law dies. Okay, to me, there is this constant conflation there. Interesting you say that, because to me, you just undermined everything you were trying to say in disagreement with what I said. Let's see. The sins we still commit and ask forgiveness for are not on the basis of law. So I think that's just a misunderstanding. For the basis of law does not offer any forgiveness. So that makes sense that you think that. Any forgiveness unless the atonement removes its demands. The demands are the demands of the penalty, which Jesus took on. He took on the curse of the law. That's where if you don't obey, the death of the testator. He died to let them off the hook, basically, because they made a blood oath with God that all that the Lord has said we will do, and then they didn't do it, and they disobeyed. And they had the provision of the sacrifice to hold them over until they would obey. So they'd come into right relationship with God, and they didn't. But then Jesus modifies the covenant, which is what God's plan was, to bring salvation to all the nations. And bring that new covenant where he magnifies the law. You think he magnified the law just to do away with it? So if you mean the law, that is Mosaic covenant, yes, that's ratified, and then you come into the new covenant. But the things that define the character of God and how we're to bear his image and what Jesus wants us to do, his commandments. Look, are we supposed to keep Jesus' commandments or not? Are Jesus and God's commandments the same? Is the morality of Jesus the same as his Father? That's the question. And the answer is, if you believe in the Trinity, you better say yes. So now the question is, well, what must I do? Well, refrain from evil, flee to Jesus and refrain from evil, flee from evil and, look to the cross. Oh, what do you mean? Are you saved by no, you're saved by faith and the merits of Christ. And then you look at Christ and you go, look what my sin did to the Savior. Look what he was willing to do. And then he's the way too, right? The truth, the life. Are we being conformed into the image of the Son? Now, what makes Jesus righteous? Just because he's God? Or did he become a man and accomplish something? God's will. To be the atonement. God's will. He kept the law. Because he kept the law how it was intended originally. So, what am I saying? I'm saying, I want to be like Jesus. Did he break God's law? No. Does he want us to? No. It's really not that difficult. This is like how everyone understood it. In Christian history, they just kind of muddied the waters a little bit more now. probably because of the Sabbath issue. Everybody else just kept Sunday as Sabbath. And now everybody recognizes that's wrong. And so now they're saying, the law is done away with. Let's just look at it that way. When no one saw it that way, everyone understood this. What's the deal? Take a day off, man. I'm biased, so that's how I look at it. It seems like that since Adventists came on the scene, all of a sudden all the derivatives of Protestantism, except for a few different groups, are like, oh no, actually the moral law is done away with too. That doesn't make any sense at all. Read people over the last 500 years, see how they talk. And almost anyone you read in your own denomination, if you read about them 100 years ago, they'll just say, keep the Sabbath according to these commandments. Only they kept Sunday. It's like everybody knows that's false. And now, but rather than do it or understanding its undergirding, they just say the whole law's done away with. And I'm telling you, God, it's literally prophecy being fulfilled before your eyes. That's all I'm going to say. I talked about this. Why do you think the Antichrist is called the man of lawlessness? Why do you think every time Jesus says, I don't know you, and he talks about someone who's cast out, he says, worker of lawlessness? Every time it says, let no man deceive you in the New Testament, it talks about false teachers leading people into sin. It talks about don't be fooled, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. Every time it talks about let no man deceive you. I mean, not every single time, but most of the time it's either don't let anybody fool you. You're supposed to do righteousness. Don't let anybody fool you. You're supposed to keep his commandments. Don't let anybody fool you. Sin is transgression of the law. And Jesus characterizes people who he doesn't know as lawless. And John says, if you want to know that you know Jesus, keep his commandments. Here's the patience of the saints. They keep the commandments. Here's the ones the devil's after. They keep the commandments and have the testimony of Jesus. Here's the one that are led into the city. They keep the commandments so that they may have right into the city and have the testimony of Jesus or the faith of Jesus. Here's how we know that we will know him. If you love me, keep my commandments. I mean, like, how many ways does he have to say it? Well, what's his commandments? I'm not really sure. Well, it's like he came down during the Sinai covenant and gave 10 commandments that he spoke from the mountaintop. And then he wrote with his own finger. And then they put that in the ark. And that's in the most holy place of all in the temple. And now you're the temple. And the Holy Spirit dwells in you. What do you think that suggests? That the laws are written on your heart? Those principles that were inside the ark in the Holy of Holies? Is that still there or not? If yes, that's inside you. That's your heart. That's what God prophesied he would do. He would magnify it, making it honorable. And then when Jesus taught, what did Jesus teach? When did Jesus fulfill, he shall magnify the law and make it honorable? Sermon on the Mount. If you even hate your brother, it's like murder. If you even lust after a woman, it's adultery. If you've broken one, you've broken them all. You know what that means? That means if he mentions the 10 commandments, if you've broken one of those, you've broken them all. That means there's 10 commandments. And he magnified that law, and it's supposed to be on your heart. So I'm just going to do this. I hope I don't offend anybody, but remember the Sabbath. Jesus created it for man, and he's Lord of it. Why not take the day off and honor that? So that it might go well with you. God bless. All the best to you.